I never imagined that the course of my life and my marriage would be steered by a single ultimatum-laden rule. Looking back, I can hardly believe how a simple demand from Jennifer changed everything. It started with a condition that sounded more like a decree than a gentle suggestion. If I didn't shed enough weight, our intimate moments would be limited to just 3 times a year. I was already well aware of the issues that my weight was causing, but to have my self-worth and our closeness measured by a number felt like an unbearable challenge. At the time, I was at 380 pounds, a figure that weighed on me physically and emotionally. Jennifer's proposition was stark and unyielding. I remember the day vividly, sitting across from her at our worn kitchen table, the air heavy with tension and unsaid regrets. "Alex, if you don't start taking care of yourself, if you don't lose the weight, I won't allow us to be intimate more than 3 times a year." It wasn't just about physical attraction or superficial standards. It was as if she believed that my transformation would somehow redeem both our lives. And so began my arduous journey. I plunged into a relentless regimen of exercise and strict dieting. Every day became a battle of wills, a test of determination against the relentless lure of old habits and comfort foods that had defined my life for so long. The early mornings were the hardest. I dragged myself out of bed before dawn, lacing up my sneakers and heading out into the cold, quiet streets for a run that felt more like a penance than a path to better health. Every step was a reminder of my promise to change, not just for Jennifer, but for myself, even though deep down I wasn't sure I was worthy of such transformation. Over the course of 3 grueling years, I watched the numbers on the scale fall, slowly but surely. I went from 380 pounds to 244, a staggering loss of 136 pounds. Each lost pound was a victory, but the real test came when I finally began to feel strong enough, both physically and emotionally, to consider calling it quits. I had pushed myself to my limits, and at long last, the monstrous daily routine started to feel like it was robbing me of the simple pleasures of life. I craved normalcy. I wanted to enjoy a meal without obsessing over calories, to have a lazy Sunday without the guilt of wasted progress. I approached Jennifer with the idea of easing off the punishing schedule. I thought that after all the sacrifices, it was time to find some balance, a pause in the relentless race for perfection. But her reaction was anything but what I expected. Instead of understanding, she became colder, more insistent. "If you stop now, if you let yourself enjoy life without that constant discipline, then maybe I should find someone who will." Her words stung deeply. In that moment, I felt the full weight of her ultimatum, not just as a challenge, but as a threat to the very foundation of our relationship. It wasn't simply about the physical transformation anymore. It became a test of my resolve, my identity. I began to wonder if I was even living my life for me or for the approval of someone who seemed to measure her love in terms of my ability to change. Was I sacrificing my happiness and the joy of rediscovering life's small indulgences for the sake of a promise that felt more like a prison sentence? The more I thought about it, the more I realized that my body was not just a battleground. It was a living testament to the love, struggle, and sacrifice that had defined our marriage from the beginning. There were moments when the solitude of the early morning runs made me question everything. The rhythm of my footsteps on the pavement echoed the ticking of a clock. I couldn't slow down. I wondered if I was turning into someone else, someone defined by a rule rather than by the dreams and passions that once lit up my heart. And yet, as much as I resented the ultimatum, I couldn't ignore the undeniable progress I had made. I was healthier, more energetic, and, in many ways, happier. But at what cost? I kept replaying our conversations in my head, trying to find a hint of vulnerability in her tone, a moment of shared understanding. Instead, every discussion ended with her unwavering stance, her eyes reflecting a mix of determination and something else I couldn't quite decipher. Perhaps insecurity, or maybe even fear. I began to see that this wasn't just about my weight. It was about control, about holding on to a vision of what our marriage should be, even if that vision was as brittle as glass. And then came the ultimate twist. Just when I thought I had reached a crossroads, when I felt the first true pangs of liberation from the shackles of constant self-surveillance, Jennifer's ultimatum resurfaced with renewed ferocity. She wasn't willing to let me reclaim any part of the life that once was. Her threat wasn't just a fleeting moment of anger. It was a calculated move to maintain the status quo, to keep me tethered to the path of endless self-improvement. The revelation hit me hard. I realized that I had been chasing a mirage of acceptance, one that was always conditional, always a step away. Now, standing at the intersection of desire and defiance, I'm forced to confront a reality that's more complicated than I ever imagined. The man I once was, before the scales, before the endless runs, before the looming threat of replacement, seems like a distant memory. And yet, somewhere deep inside, a spark of rebellion is starting to glow. Could it be that in this struggle for physical transformation, I was losing sight of who I truly am? I'm still on this journey, wrestling with the consequences of a rule that was meant to be a motivator, but became a barbed wire fence around my heart. The path ahead is uncertain, filled with twists I never saw coming, and I'm left to wonder if the price of change was worth the cost of losing a part of myself. Every day, as I lace up my sneakers and step out into the cold, I carry the weight of both my body and my burdens. And in the silent hours before dawn, I question whether I have the strength to reclaim the freedom that once seemed so effortless. This is my story, a tale of transformation, love, and the haunting price of acceptance. I'm not sure where it will lead, but one thing is clear. Sometimes the rules we set, or the ones imposed upon us, end up defining us far more than we ever intended. I was still reeling from the shock of her ultimatum when a deeper, gnawing suspicion began to take root. The very idea that Jennifer could hide something so significant from me was unthinkable, yet the evidence was slowly starting to paint a very different picture of our life together. Late one evening, after another punishing day at work, I found myself alone with my thoughts and my doubts. It wasn't enough that she had imposed those harsh conditions on our intimacy. Something about her behavior, the way she always seemed to be guarding her secrets, pushed me to dig a little deeper. I convinced myself that it was simply a matter of trust, that I needed to know what was really going on. One night, driven by a mix of anger and desperation, I decided to inspect her phone. The act felt like trespassing into a realm I wasn't sure I should enter, but the persistent suspicion overruled my hesitation. I retrieved her call logs, a seemingly mundane list of numbers and times, and began to study them with an intensity born of betrayal. I wasn't looking for confirmation of infidelity outright. I was searching for patterns that might explain the disconnect between us. What I found sent a chill down my spine. For the past 5 years, there were calls made to a set of unknown numbers with an unsettling regularity. Every Monday and Thursday, without fail, her phone had lit up with these mysterious contacts. The precision of the schedule was uncanny. It aligned perfectly with the nights I had spent at the office, buried under piles of work until the late hours. The correlation was too sharp to be dismissed as coincidence. Each log entry was like a silent confession. The calls were brief, just enough to suggest a routine check-in, but devoid of any context. I couldn't help but feel that these calls were deliberately timed, a secret ritual hidden behind the facade of everyday life. I sat there, heart pounding, as I pieced together the timeline. On Mondays and Thursdays, while I was slogging away at work, she was engaging in these cryptic conversations. It was as if our lives had split into two parallel tracks that rarely intersected, each governed by its own set of rules and mysteries. The betrayal was overwhelming. I felt as if I had been reduced to a mere statistic in her carefully measured life. A life where my struggles and sacrifices were just background noise to a hidden narrative I wasn't privy to. The more I scrutinized the logs, the more questions swirled in my mind. Who were these unknown contacts? What did they mean to her? And more damning of all, why had she felt the need to hide these calls from me? In the days that followed, I found myself obsessively comparing these discoveries with my own schedule. Every time I had worked late, a knot of anxiety would tighten in my stomach as I recalled those exact days marked by her secret calls. The realization that she was consistently occupied with someone or something else on the very nights I was absent from home was a bitter pill to swallow. It wasn't just a matter of infidelity. It was a revelation that shook the very foundation of our shared life. I remember one particular evening, the weight of the revelation pressing down on me so heavily that sleep seemed like a distant dream. I sat in the dim light of the living room, the quiet hum of the house amplifying the silence between my racing thoughts. Each ring in my memory echoed with the unanswered questions that now defined my existence. I began to wonder if all those years of relentless sacrifice and self-imposed discipline were nothing more than part of a larger, darker plan, one that had me unwittingly cast in a role I never agreed to play. It was then that I realized something even more unsettling. The pattern of these calls wasn't random. It was deliberate. Jennifer had been orchestrating this routine long before my weight loss journey had begun. It was as if those mysterious conversations were woven into the fabric of our relationship from the very start, a hidden thread that ran parallel to everything I had believed about us. I couldn't help but feel that while I was busy battling my own demons, she was managing another life, a life that required secrets and compartmentalization. I found myself at a crossroads. Confronting her immediately seemed like the obvious next step, but a part of me hesitated, fearing that such a confrontation would lead to an irreversible fracture. Instead, I resolved to continue my investigation in silence. I needed to understand the full scope of what was happening before I could even begin to process the implications for our marriage. Every unanswered question was a ticking time bomb, threatening to explode and shatter any remaining semblance of trust between us. As the days turned into weeks, my inner turmoil only deepened. I spent countless nights revisiting the call logs, each pass through the data reinforcing the notion that something was amiss. I began to see a pattern not just in the timing, but in the frequency and duration of the calls. There was a clinical regularity to it, a system of checks that suggested not only premeditation, but also a calculated effort to keep one part of her life completely separate from the other. And all the while, I was left in the dark, unaware of the true nature of those connections. I tried to recall moments from the past when I might have seen hints of this duality, a casual remark, a fleeting glance, something that now made perfect sense in light of what I had uncovered. It was a painful exercise in hindsight, a dissection of memories that I had once cherished as part of our shared history. The trust one had once placed in her was now in tatters, replaced by a cold, unyielding resolve to get to the bottom of this mystery. Every piece of evidence I unearthed felt like a step closer to a truth I wasn't sure I was ready to face. Yet, the more I discovered, the more I understood that ignorance would only prolong the inevitable confrontation. I began to plan how I might approach her about these findings, carefully, methodically, without letting my anger overwhelm the delicate situation. I needed answers, not an explosive argument that would leave us both wounded and adrift. In the quiet solitude of those late nights, as I pored over her call history, I couldn't help but feel a profound sense of isolation. I was trapped between two worlds, one where I was the dedicated husband sacrificing every ounce of my being for a better future, and another where I was the unwitting spectator to a secret life that had unfolded right under my nose. The call logs were a cruel reminder that the truth was not only hidden from me, but was being meticulously concealed by someone I had trusted with everything. The investigation had become an obsession, a consuming need to understand the full extent of her deception. It wasn't just about the calls. It was about reclaiming a part of myself that had been lost in the chaos of our compromised marriage. I was fighting not only for the truth about Jennifer, but for the right to know who I really was, beyond the shadow of her demands and manipulations. As I sit here now, reflecting on those long, agonizing nights of piecing together the puzzle of her secret communications, I realized that the discovery was only the beginning. The call logs, with their cold precision, had opened a door to a realm of hidden truths, a realm where every unanswered question led to even deeper, darker mysteries. And in that moment of clarity, I knew that the journey ahead would force me to confront not just the betrayal of the past, but the uncertain future of a life built on secrets and half-truths. I was no longer just a man on a weight loss journey. defined by the conditions of intimacy and sacrifice. I was now a man driven by a need to uncover the layers of deception that had slowly eroded the foundation of our relationship. The truth was out there, embedded in every call made on those fateful Mondays and Thursdays, waiting to be unearthed, and I was determined to find it, no matter how painful the revelation might be. The days of suspicion and silent investigation grew heavier as I began noticing a pattern I couldn't ignore. It wasn't just the cryptic call logs anymore. I started catching glimpses, small, almost imperceptible details that hinted at a deeper betrayal. Jennifer's schedule, which once appeared rigid and predictable, now revealed cracks. I learned that she was frequently meeting with her personal trainer, Mike, during the same evenings when I was stuck late at the office. The timing was too precise to be a mere coincidence. Unable to shake off the nagging doubt any longer, I decided to take matters into my own hands. The idea of an invasion of privacy was abhorrent, but I felt cornered, forced into an action that seemed like the only way to uncover the truth. I set up a wiretap on her phone and tablet, an act I never imagined I'd stoop to, but desperation has a way of blurring lines. Every night, as I lay awake, I wondered what I might discover, each moment of silence filled with the weight of the potential revelation. Then, one chilly evening, as I was reviewing the intercepted communications, my heart sank. Among the numerous intercepted messages, one recording stood out, a conversation between Jennifer and Mike. I pressed play, the room filling with their voices, casual yet laced with intimacy that I had long forgotten existed between us. The recording was damning. In a tone that oscillated between hesitancy and cold certainty, Jennifer admitted that her affair had been going on for over 3.5 years. Every word she uttered shattered a piece of my remaining hope, each syllable a stark reminder that the life I believed we were building was nothing more than a facade. Listening to that conversation, I felt an avalanche of emotions: betrayal, anger, disbelief. The tone of her voice, the way she casually referenced meetings with Mike, confirmed every suspicion that had haunted me for so long. It was not just an isolated lapse of judgment. It was a prolonged betrayal meticulously hidden behind the guise of mundane daily routines. As I replayed the recording over and over, I was forced to confront the painful reality. While I was fighting my own battles and dedicating my life to self-improvement, she had been living a double life, one that had been unfolding in secret for years. The revelation was devastating. I could hardly reconcile the woman I thought I knew with the one who had woven this intricate web of deceit. The intimacy we once shared was now tainted by a truth that I could neither unhear nor forget. Every moment of our past, every shared meal, every whispered promise, suddenly seemed hollow, overlaid with the bitter taste of betrayal. In the aftermath of that discovery, I felt both numb and acutely aware of every detail of our life together. The sound of her laughter in the background, the familiar tone of her voice on the phone, it all became a cruel reminder of the secret she had maintained for so long. The recording wasn't just evidence of infidelity. It was a mirror reflecting the shattered trust and the disintegration of the life I had thought we were building. Now, standing at the precipice of a decision I never wanted to face, I was left with an overwhelming sense of isolation. The person I had devoted so much of myself to was a stranger with a hidden life, a life in which I was an unwitting pawn. I wondered how deeply her deception ran, what other parts of her life were built on lies, and what that meant for our future together. The recording, its every detail etched in my mind, forced me to ask the painful question: was everything I had sacrificed truly worth it? I was now trapped in a reality where every memory was tainted by deception, and every promise made was just another line in a story I no longer recognized as my own. In that moment, the weight of the truth pressed down on me, and I realized that the journey ahead would force me to confront not just the betrayal, but the very foundation of my own identity. Every day since that fateful night, I have been forced to sift through the remnants of our shared past, trying to piece together how I could have been so blind to the signs. And now, with the undeniable evidence in hand, the future is a landscape of uncertain terrain, a path marred by secrets and betrayal. The voice on the recording, Jennifer's voice, continues to echo in my mind, a constant reminder of the trust that was so ruthlessly broken. The days after that damning recording, my heart hardened with a resolve I hadn't known I possessed. I knew that facing Jennifer head-on would be inevitable, but I needed to do more than just confront her privately. I had to shatter the facade she had built around our lives. The plan crystallized in my mind. I would stage an event that she could neither ignore nor rationalize away. I decided to invite 4 captivating women over to our house. Each one was carefully chosen, not only for their beauty, but for the strength and poise they exuded. A symbolic reminder that I was reclaiming what I'd lost in this crumbling marriage. I arranged everything with meticulous precision. I wanted her to see that while she was busy orchestrating a double life, I was rediscovering the parts of me that had long been buried under self-doubt and betrayal. The evening arrived, and as I welcomed each guest into our home, a strange mix of adrenaline and grim satisfaction surged within me. The atmosphere was charged, a silent promise that the night would mark a turning point. Jennifer arrived home later than usual, her expression betraying a mixture of fatigue and uncertainty. She stepped through the door into a room filled with laughter, flirtatious glances, and an undeniable air of confidence. For a moment, I watched her closely, trying to read the swirling emotions in her eyes. But there was no time for second-guessing. I had come too far. One of the women, an elegantly dressed lawyer with a commanding presence and eyes that missed nothing, made her way toward Jennifer with a purposeful stride. The room fell into a heavy silence as she pulled out a folder from her purse and, without hesitation, slid it across the table toward Jennifer. As she opened the folder, my heart pounded, not out of nervousness this time, but with the certainty of finality. Inside were divorce papers, an irrevocable declaration that our marriage had reached its breaking point. Jennifer's face flushed with a mix of shock and indignation. She stuttered, trying desperately to muster a justification for everything that had transpired. "Alex, I can explain," she began, her voice wavering as if each word was an admission of defeat before it was even spoken aloud. But I wasn't there to listen to justifications or excuses. I had come prepared, and I knew that the truth was a weapon far sharper than any empty apology. I rose from my seat, my eyes fixed on hers with a steely determination that conveyed every bit of the betrayal and hurt I had endured. "Jennifer," I said, my voice steady and resolute, "there's nothing left to explain." I reached into the drawer of my desk, retrieving a small USB drive that contained all the evidence, recordings, call logs, messages that documented your secret life. I placed it on the table between us, the undeniable proof glinting in the soft light of the room. Every single piece of data was a testament to the affair that had spanned over 3.5 years, a timeline of deception that I had painstakingly pieced together. Her eyes darted from the USB drive to the divorce papers, and then to me, a fleeting glimmer of panic rising within them. The lawyer's steady gaze and the knowing looks from my guests only deepened the gravity of the moment. In that charged silence, every word she had ever whispered, every promise she had broken, reverberated around us. I could see the facade cracking, the carefully constructed lies dissolving under the weight of irrefutable evidence. As she tried to speak again, her voice cracked under the pressure of undeniable truth. "It's not what you think, Alex," she pleaded, her tone a mix of desperation and regret. But I was done waiting for explanations that no longer mattered. I had spent too long wallowing in the shadows of betrayal, and tonight was about reclaiming my dignity. I recounted every instance of her duplicity, the secret calls, the meticulously timed meetings, and that final, soul-crushing recording. Every detail laid bare the extent of the deception that had plagued our life together. The room, once filled with an undercurrent of tension, now buzzed with a mix of vindication and sorrow. I watched as the reality of my words settled over Jennifer like a heavy shroud. In that moment, I realized that the person I had once known was irretrievably lost, a casualty of a web of lies too tangled to ever be unwound. The evidence was irrefutable, and with it, I had the power to sever the ties that had once bound me to a life of half-truths and betrayal. With a final, measured exhale, I let the silence speak for me. The divorce papers, the USB drive, the presence of these for women who embodied everything I was reclaiming. All of it painted a stark picture of a marriage that had run its course. There was no need for further justification, no need for more explanations. Tonight, I had taken a stand for myself, dismantling the illusions that had kept me tethered to a past I no longer wished to endure. The payback wasn't about revenge. It was about liberation. I had orchestrated this moment to reclaim the parts of me that had been buried under years of sacrifice and unreciprocated expectations. As I watched Jennifer's facade crumble before my eyes, I felt a bittersweet mixture of relief and sorrow, a bittersweet acknowledgement that sometimes the only path to healing was to confront the darkness head-on and to let go of what could never be fixed. That night, as the echoes of our confrontation faded into the background, I knew that life would never be the same. The road ahead was uncertain, laden with the scars of betrayal and the promise of a future defined by honesty and newfound freedom. And in that uncertain future, I resolved to never again allow someone else's rules to dictate the terms of my existence. I can still remember the night the news hit me like a freight train, a night that marked a turning point in this twisted saga of betrayal and retribution. I'd been grappling with the raw shock of Jennifer's deceit and the weight of our shattered marriage when I heard from a friend that Mike, the man who had become the linchpin of her secret double life, had finally drawn the ire of someone equally scorned. It turned out that the husband of Mike's mistress, a man pushed to his breaking point by betrayal, had rallied two of his closest friends and confronted Mike in a deserted parking lot behind a rundown bar. They didn't hesitate. The beating was merciless and swift, a cascade of brutal blows that left Mike's world falling apart. I later learned that his jaw had been shattered, several of his ribs were broken, and almost all of his teeth were knocked out. It wasn't just the physical devastation that struck me. It was the raw, unfiltered message that retribution for betrayal comes in violent, uncompromising forms. As horrifying as it was to picture, I couldn't help but feel that there was a certain twisted justice in it, a punishment that mirrored the treachery Mike had helped orchestrate behind my back. I, too, found myself unable to stand idle in the face of such duplicity. Fate, or maybe sheer determination, placed me in a moment of unguarded confrontation with Mike. Our paths crossed unexpectedly one evening, and the anger that had been building inside me over years of pain and betrayal surged forward. I didn't hold back. In a burst of adrenaline, I landed a brutal hit squarely in his groin, a strike that resonated with every ounce of the hurt I'd been forced to endure. That moment was visceral. As the pain shot through him, I felt a grim satisfaction, as if finally reclaiming a piece of the dignity I'd lost in this long, dark descent. Even as I was forced to confront the reality of our actions, a part of me couldn't escape the nagging questions. Had we really succeeded in balancing the scales? Could violence ever truly undo the betrayal that had infiltrated every corner of my life? In the aftermath, as news of Mike's public humiliation and shattered body spread, I found myself caught between a deep sense of vindication and a profound inner conflict. On one hand, Mike was now paying dearly for the role he'd played, a role that had contributed to a web of deception stretching back over 3.5 years. On the other hand, the very act of inflicting pain, of joining a cycle of retribution, left behind scars that weren't just physical. They were deeply personal. In the days following that fateful night, the harsh reality of our actions settled in slowly. I would replay the moment over and over in my mind. The sound of fists meeting flesh, the sickening thud of each blow, and that final decisive strike that had forced Mike to his knees. I recognized that while the physical punishment was undeniable, the emotional toll was something entirely different. Revenge, once unleashed, rarely remains confined to its intended target. Instead, it seeps into every corner of your existence, leaving behind a trail of moral compromises and questions that haunt you long after the initial fury has subsided. For Mike, there was no recovery, not just because of the shattered jaw, the broken ribs, and the near loss of his teeth, but because his body now bore the indelible marks of betrayal's consequences. For me, the satisfaction of that moment was tempered by the realization that retribution is a double-edged sword. I had taken a stand for myself, a stand that felt necessary in a moment of utter despair and betrayal. But the price of that stand was the part of me that once believed in justice that didn't come at the cost of becoming something unrecognizable. I remember sitting in the quiet aftermath, alone with my thoughts, and wondering whether I had truly liberated myself or simply entered another cycle of violence and regret. Each bruise, each broken bone, each echo of pain in Mike's memory served as a stark reminder of the harsh truth. When trust is obliterated, the only currency left is retribution, and its cost is always measured in scars. That night marked a bitter lesson in accountability, a lesson that forced me to confront not only the betrayal, but also the shadows within myself. As I continued to piece together the fragments of my life, I understood that the road to healing was riddled with choices that blur the lines between victim and avenger. In the wake of Mike's downfall, I was left with the undeniable truth that sometimes, to reclaim a semblance of dignity, you must face the darkness head-on, even if it means embracing a part of yourself that you never wanted to acknowledge. And so, as I move forward from this chapter of my life, I carry with me the weight of every decision made in the heat of vengeance. Mike's shattered body and the brutal echoes of that confrontation are constant reminders of the price of betrayal. They serve as a somber testament that, while retribution might momentarily restore a sense of balance, the cycle of pain it perpetuates leaves behind wounds that time alone may never fully heal. In the aftermath of the explosive confrontation and the violent reckonings, the dust finally began to settle. Jennifer's life unraveled in ways neither of us had anticipated. Overwhelmed by the fallout of her decisions, she slipped into a deep depression. It wasn't long before she packed up her belongings and moved in with a close friend, a silent retreat from the life we had once shared. Her once confident demeanor had crumbled into a state of constant sorrow, a stark reminder of the cost of betrayal. The divorce itself was a drawn-out, grueling process that lasted 9 long months. Every court session, every heated discussion over assets and alimony, chipped away at what little remained of our former life. I watched as the legal system methodically dismantled the memories of our shared past, reducing them to cold, calculated figures. In the end, the financial toll on her was staggering: $75,000 in legal fees and settlements that echoed the magnitude of her misdeeds and the chaos she had sown. While money could never replace the lost trust or mend the wounds of betrayal, it was a bitter metric of how far apart our lives had come to be. As the legal battles ended and the final signatures dried on the divorce papers, I found myself standing at a crossroads. Many assumed that I would use the moment as an excuse to dive into new relationships or to flaunt a newfound freedom by returning to the party circuit. There were whispers and sideways glances about the women I had been associated with in the wake of everything that had transpired. But the truth was far simpler, and in many ways far more profound. Rather than chasing fleeting romances or clinging to the remnants of a life built on revenge and regret, I decided it was time to rebuild something that truly mattered: my own well-being. The most unexpected twist in my journey toward healing was not found in another relationship, but in the companionship of 2 energetic Labradors. Their boundless enthusiasm, unconditional love, and sheer joy of living reminded me that happiness often arrives in forms we least expect. Every morning, as I greeted their wagging tails and eager eyes, I was reminded that life, in all its unpredictable glory, had the power to renew itself. Days turned into weeks, and weeks into months, and gradually I discovered a quiet happiness in the simple rhythms of daily life. The Labradors became my constant companions on long walks in the park, during which I'd find solace in the chirping of birds and the rustle of leaves. I started to reconnect with parts of myself that had been buried under the weight of constant conflict and heartache. It was as if the chaos of the past had finally given way to a new beginning, a chance to rediscover who I was, separate from the tangled web of betrayal and retribution. I invested time in hobbies I had long neglected, took up jogging again, and even reconnected with old friends. Every day, the simple act of caring for my new companions, coupled with the steady rhythm of a life rebuilt from the fragments of my past, filled me with a cautious optimism. I began to understand that while the scars of betrayal would always be a part of me, they no longer had to define me. Instead, I was slowly learning to let go of the anger and the need for revenge, embracing a life that celebrated genuine connection and personal growth. Looking back, it's clear that the path to this new beginning was anything but straightforward. The journey had been riddled with painful betrayals, a barrage of emotional and physical confrontations, and a legal battle that left its mark on both our lives. Yet, in the midst of that storm, I discovered an inner strength I hadn't known I possessed. I realized that sometimes the most profound acts of self-care come not from the dramatic gestures or the fiery confrontations, but from the quiet moments of self-reflection and the simple joys of everyday life. Today, as I watch my Labradors frolic in the backyard, I can't help but smile at the thought of how unpredictable life truly is. Jennifer's spiral into depression and the costly, bitter end to our marriage stand as stark reminders of the chaos that betrayal breeds. But they also serve as catalysts for change, a painful, yet necessary detour on the road to rediscovery. In the end, I learned that the greatest payback wasn't in the retribution or the public unraveling of a once glorious union. The real victory was reclaiming my life, my peace of mind, and the chance to forge a future built on authenticity and self-love. I wasn't defined by the tumult of the past, nor by the fleeting drama of revenge. Instead, I was defined by the quiet, steady pace of healing and the belief that, even in the darkest of times, a new beginning was possible. And so, with every sunrise that finds me taking the dogs for a morning walk, with every quiet evening spent reflecting on the lessons learned, I am reminded that life, despite its twists and turns, always offers a path forward. A path where the echoes of past betrayals fade into the background, replaced by the gentle, reassuring promise of a fresh start. In the months that followed our tumultuous unraveling, life began to settle into an unexpected equilibrium, a final reckoning of sorts that left little room for the chaos of the past. The echoes of my decisions, the pain of betrayal, and the relentless pursuit of truth had all led to a point where the fallout was as complete as it was irrevocable. Mike, the man who had once been the linchpin in Jennifer's secret double life, found himself paying the ultimate price. His indiscretions had not remained hidden for long. Rumors of his questionable behavior, once confined to hushed whispers and sidelong glances, eventually reached the higher echelons of the fitness club's management. The accusations, far too serious to ignore, resulted in a swift and uncompromising dismissal. Mike's career, built on promises of health and trust, was shattered in one fell swoop, leaving him to face a future defined by the very behavior he had tried so desperately to conceal. Jennifer, on the other hand, experienced a fall from grace that went far beyond the loss of our marriage. As the layers of her deceptions were peeled away, the social fabric of her life unraveled. Friends who had once stood by her side began to distance themselves, unable or unwilling to be associated with a cascade of scandals and broken trust. In time, the circle of acquaintances and confidants she had so carefully curated disintegrated completely. The isolation was palpable, a stark, silent void that served as a daily reminder of the cost of her choices. Not only had she lost the husband she once claimed to love, but she had also forfeited the friendships and community that might have provided solace in the aftermath of her decisions. For me, the long road of retribution and sorrow eventually gave way to a liberating new beginning. The tumultuous years, marked by betrayal, confrontations, and legal battles, faded into the background as I embraced a life free from toxic relationships. The freedom was intoxicating, a chance to rediscover who I was beyond the shadows of the past. I traded the bitterness of my former life for the exhilaration of travel and the warmth of genuine connections with new friends. No longer confined by the heavy expectations of a failed marriage or the remnants of a world built on deceit, I found solace in the simple joys of exploration and the company of people who celebrated honesty and positivity. As I journeyed through new cities, hiked trails that led to breathtaking vistas, and laughed with companions who had no ties to the ghosts of my past, I felt a profound sense of renewal. The scars of betrayal, though still visible in quiet moments of reflection, had begun to fade, replaced by the vibrant colors of hope and resilience. I learned that true happiness isn't found in retribution or the validation of a painful victory. It lies in the ability to let go and to welcome each new day as a chance to reinvent oneself. In this final chapter, the outcomes were as clear as they were bittersweet. Mike's downfall served as a stark reminder of how quickly trust can evaporate under the weight of dishonesty. Jennifer's isolation and loss underscored the painful reality that the cost of betrayal extends far beyond the dissolution of a relationship. And I, once ensnared in a labyrinth of pain and retribution, finally stepped into the light of a life redefined by freedom, self-discovery, and the joy of authentic connections. Every time I set out on a new adventure, meet someone who sparks a genuine conversation, or simply take a quiet moment to appreciate the sunrise, I am reminded that the past, with all its scars and shattered dreams, does not dictate the promise of tomorrow. The final result was not merely a story of loss and punishment, but one of transformation, a testament to the power of letting go, the resilience of the human spirit, and the unyielding possibility of new beginnings.